than I ever have been under 30 years of Irish terrorism. And thankfully, the American-backed Irish terrorism seems to have come to an end following a dramatic statement today by the IRA to say that they are getting rid of all of their arms and they are going through a political route. Apart from the obvious fear we all feel, there is another side effect to this ill-conceived war on terror. Our freedoms and liberties have been carpet-bombed by George Bush and his eager-to-please sidekick, Tony Blair. The pair have become Al-Qaeda's finest recruiting officers. And if Tony Blair is regarded as George Bush's poodle, what does that make Howard in Australia? You know, you've got a lot to be thankful for, that you have a leader in this country who has stood up to the bully boy tactics of America and said, no, we don't want to get involved in your illegal wars. We also have Guantanamo Bay, a boil on the face of human rights. Its continued existence, torture and abuse of Muslim prisoners serves only to make the lives of every Westerner working in Muslim lands a target for so-called extremists. And it's no coincidence that in those harrowing videos of Western hostages, all the victims have been made to wear orange boiler suits, just like the ones in Guantanamo Bay. In Britain, we have our own Guantanamo Bay. It's called Belmarsh and Woodhill, where even today, around 40 Muslim brothers have been detained without trial, without charge, in legal limbo, not worthy of a banana republic. And it is set to get worse. And Blair made that quite clear just a couple of days ago when he said he was going to bring in new legislation to make us all feel safe. Of course, what that means is this will restrict our freedoms and liberties. And if it's happening in Britain and America, and to a certain extent in Australia, you have to be on your guard to make sure it doesn't happen here. And when you get idiots like Winston Peters standing up and coming out with the bile that he came out with yesterday, you have to be on your guard and you have to be able to rebut these allegations. I'm sad to say that the roots of his speech yesterday were founded on the ridiculous allegations of a Muslim who went on TV on Sunday on a program called Agenda and said that he had seen and knew of radical Muslim groups preying on university students in New Zealand. The man is a liar and he has to be brought to account. He is one of our brothers and he must be brought to account because he is damaging not only everyone in this room and our children, he is damaging himself and his family and everybody else from his community as well. Then we have the disturbing images in Iraq that came out of Abu Ghraib. The Bush administration just does not seem to realize the irreparable damage that that scandal created. As you all know, I was captured by the Taliban, and according to Bush and Blair, the Taliban was the most evil, brutal regime in the world. Well, I can tell you here tonight, thank Allah I was captured by the most evil, brutal regime in the world and not by the Americans. We have continued rumours about the abuse and torture and gang rapes of prisoners in US custody. There is a group of brothers, 2,000 brothers, called the Ghost Detainees. They're called the ghost detainees because nobody knows that they officially exist. The International Red Cross, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International have all tried to make enquiries of the whereabouts of certain individuals, and they keep meeting a blank. There is growing evidence that 2,000 Muslim brothers are being held and tortured in US holding facilities around the world. One place in particular is the British Protectorate of Diego Garcia, where we think that some Muslim brothers are being held on US ships in the large holding bays in that protectorate. Other areas, other prisons, it's called rendition. We think that the Americans have sent these prisoners into the hands of the torture specialists of Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and possibly Thailand. There are 2,000 of our brothers who are missing. We don't know where they are. All we know is that they are in American custody. America cannot behave outside the law, as United Nations General Secretary Kofi Annan said last September. And yet they do. And the media in America is too tame to tackle the president and ask him about these atrocities and human rights abuses. Kofi Annan has done his best to criticize the American administration, but the UN is seen as a toothless organization now. One of the most revered statesmen in the world, Nelson Mandela, has also waded in and criticized the US president, who is sounding more and more these days like the sheriff of Dodge City than the president of the most powerful country in the world. He is economical with the truth, and if truth is the first casualty of war, then I can tell you now, by the time George Bush is finished with his speeches, it's in intensive care. He barely acknowledges the fact that the UN called the war on Iraq illegal. Obviously, being President of the United States means never having to say sorry. It would be great to turn around now and say, well, at least Afghanistan is improved and Iraq is on the way to full recovery. The truth is, both countries are sinking into quagmires of Vietnam proportions. You can have the biggest and the best bombs in the world, but if you can't see your enemy, what use are they? Using a boxing analogy, Bush has gone into the ring not with a heavyweight, but with a hornet he can barely see. He can lash out, and while it's not going to kill him, it sure as hell is going to sting him and make his life miserable. You would think he would have learned his lesson by now, but he hasn't. And I really wish that he'd read his daddy's memoirs before setting out on such a disastrous war as Iraq. George Bush Sr. wrote, "Trying to eliminate Saddam would have incurred incalculable human and political costs. Apprehending him was probably impossible. We would have been forced to occupy Baghdad and, in effect, rule Iraq. There was no viable exit strategy we could see, violating another of our principles. Furthermore, we have been self-consciously trying to set a pattern for handling aggression in the post-Cold War world, going in and occupying Iraq, thus unilaterally exceeding the United Nations mandate would have destroyed the precedent of international response to aggression that we had hoped to establish. Had we gone the invasion route, the United States could conceivably still be an occupying power in a bitterly hostile land. And that's what George Bush's father wrote about why he wasn't going to invade Iraq. As I keep saying, I am not an enemy of America, nor am I a traitor to the West. The enemy is within. The enemy is running office, is running government in Washington, in London, in Australia, and in other countries where the leaders are craving for American attention. Our freedoms are under attack from Bush and Blair. They are being trampled by the likes of Wolfowitz and Rumsfeld. The battle to preserve our freedoms, and when I say our freedoms, I mean the freedoms of the Muslims, the freedoms of the West, the freedoms of everyone in America, Britain, New Zealand, Australia, across Europe, all our freedoms. The battle to preserve our freedoms aren't being fought on the streets of Kabul or Baghdad. They have to be fought in our streets, in our towns and villages and cities, right across Europe, across America, across Australia, even in New Zealand. You cannot afford to sit back and be relaxed. When I became a Muslim, like all of you here, the reverts anyway, we joined the biggest and the best family in the world. And if somebody hurts one of us, they hurt all of us. And if our brothers and sisters are in pain in America, we all feel that pain. We don't sit back and do nothing. We try and work and activate and motivate ourselves to do something, even if it's something as simple as writing a letter into the local newspaper. Every one of us is needed on the front line to salvage what is left of Western democracy, and we can only protect our civil rights through speaking out. And when American and British troops do retreat, and they will, they'll eventually leave Vietnam style from Iraq, I for one will be jumping up and down and cheering as the last American helicopter takes the last soldier scrambling off the embassy roof out of Baghdad. At least those soldiers will be able to come back to find that we have preserved their freedoms and liberties. I and many others like me are pilloried and attacked for speaking the truth, but I will continue to do so without fear or favour, not just for my brothers and sisters in America, in Britain, in Abu Ghraib, in Guantanamo, and wherever else Muslims are being persecuted, but I will do it for every single individual oppressed by tyranny. Because as we know, as Muslims, we believe in social justice for everyone, not something exclusive to ourselves. We have to be courageous in these difficult times and do what we can to stand up against this imperialistic tyranny or this racist hate from idiots like Winston Peters. English philosopher Edmund Burke once said, "All that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing." The invasion of Iraq, illegal and immoral, had nothing to do with national security or freedom of democracy or human rights, or weapons of mass destruction, or defeating terrorism or disarming Iraq. The motivation was money and oil and imperial power and creating and strengthening America's watchdog in the Middle East, Israel. Israel, a country which has the fourth largest army in the world, a country which is using its army, its weapons on women and children. The real traitors are those who forced Iraq